Neshama shir chadash Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I actually have a controlled experiment because this morning, for some reason, there was no limitation on people asking questions in the middle of the shir. I never experienced, quite literally, every 3 seconds there were questions, so I can compare the two types of teaching styles. Anyway, we are praying for victory of our chayolim in all fronts of the war. As always, the lasting unity of Am Yisrael and all those whose health has been affected by the war, the safe return of all of the hostages. Refuah Shelemah, Baruch ben Frida, Batya bat Mara. Again, lasting unity and safety of Am Yisrael, safe return of the soldiers and hostages, recovery of the wounded. Aliyat Neshama. The shir was dedicated for Sasha, by Sasha and Frida Englard, in memory of their daughter Shoshana Esther, whose yahrzeit is on the 19th of Iyar, and an anonymous contribution again for the nitzachon of all our chayolim and our hostages to return safe and totally healthy to their homes. Hashem's protection of all of Klal Yisrael, the Geula Shelemah, b'mheira v'yameinu. I want to deviate a little bit from the Parsha Shavua and talk about the holidays that exist during this week. We actually had one already, and one is coming up. Yesterday was Pesach Sheni, and Friday will be Lag BaOmer. So I want to talk briefly about Pesach Sheni and Lag BaOmer. Somebody described Pesach Sheni as the most important of the unimportant holidays. That's a little cruel or a little coarse, but there was a good point about that. We often don't appreciate Pesach Sheni, and it's worthwhile to spend a few minutes about the significance of Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni, remember that in the desert, we only brought one Korban Pesach. We brought a Korban Pesach in Egypt, and then the next year, we brought one Korban Pesach in the desert. After that, the next Korban Pesach is in the days of Yoshua ben Nun. There was literally no other Korban Pesach brought in the desert. And that first Pesach in the desert, there were people who were impure. They were tamei, and the Emor has a machlokas. Why were they tamei? Either because it was their turn to carry the bones of Yosef, and they were tamei, or they were tamei because they were the ones who had to retrieve the bodies of Nadav and Avihu who died in the Mishkan, and they became tamei. A tamei person cannot bring a Korban Pesach, so they went to Moshe, and they said, why should we be deprived of bringing a Korban Pesach? Moshe didn't know the halacha, so he asks Hashem, and Hashem says, okay, we have a new law that if somebody is tamei, or this will be operative when they're in Israel, they're far away, however that's defined, they can bring the Korban Pesach 1 month later. The Korban Pesach is normally brought the 14th of Nisan, and it's eaten the night of the Seder, the 15th. Pesach Sheni is exactly 1 month later. They bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Iyar, and they could eat it the night of the 15th. Now, first of all, just as a general issue, we believe, as Pirkei Avos says, that Moshe got the whole Torah at Sinai. So if that's the case, he got all of the mitzvahs at Har Sinai. Now, Pesach Sheni is a mitzvah in the Torah. So in what sense can it be said that Moshe didn't know? Wasn't he given that mitzvah? Now, the truth is, there are 4 places in the Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu did not know the halacha. Pesach Sheni is one of them. Your tamei, etc. Another one is he didn't know the punishment for the gatherer of wood on Shabbos. He had to ask Hashem. The third is he didn't know the punishment for the blasphemer. He had to ask Hashem. And the fourth is the daughters of Tzalafchad, whose father died without any sons, and there was an uncertainty if daughters inherit property or it goes to the decedent's brothers. Moshe didn't know. Now the problem is, if this is part of the mitzvot of the Torah, didn't Moshe get all of that at Mount Sinai? So the Chazon Ish offers a very, very nice explanation for this, and he says the following. Obviously, the idea that Moshe got all the Torah at Sinai does not mean that the Jewish people were given all the mitzvot when he came down. Because after all, if you read the Torah, it's very, very clear that mitzvot are given over 40 years. There were mitzvot that Bnei Yisrael didn't even know till the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. So we have to differentiate between when did Moshe get a commandment and when was he given permission to reveal that commandment to Bnei Yisrael. Because it's very clear from reading the Chumash that mitzvos are rolled out at various occasions. And that's the meaning of the very common ubiquitous phrase, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moshe. So in English we translate lemor as saying. It's really a superfluous word. But if we understand lemor is to say it to others, this is the green light. Hashem now tells Moshe, the mitzvos that you already got at Sinai, lemor. Now is the time to recount it to Bnei Yisrael. So the Chazon Ish says, this is Moshe Rabbeinu's dilemma. He knew there was a law called Pesach Sheni, because he was given that at Sinai. But he was not yet given authorization to reveal it. God wanted it to be revealed through this incident. And every other situation. Meaning, Moshe had the knowledge, but from his perspective, it was inside information. And therefore he had to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a very, very logical approach to Moshe Rabbeinu needing certain triggers to be able to reveal it. Now, why certain mitzvos are given at certain times is always going to be a little bit of a mystery, but the Chazon Ish differentiates between when did Moshe get the commandment and when did Bnei Yisrael get the commandment. So if you were to take a snapshot of the Jewish people in the desert at any given moment in the 40 years, the mitzvot that they had would differ from picture frame to picture frame because the mitzvot are rolled out in time. Okay, so that's one point of a Pesach Sheni. But another point is this. It wouldn't have been revealed had people not asked for it. Meaning, why would they ask? They're exempt. They're tamei. As far as the halacha is concerned, they're exempt. Now, let's imagine you got a signed, stamped certificate from the Almighty that you didn't have to keep Pesach this year. And let's assume we could prove its authenticity. Are you gonna start arguing? Say, why should we be deprived? You would kind of, maybe not, but you take advantage. You got an exemption. Putting aside the halakhic issue that maybe God himself couldn't abrogate the mitzvah because the Torah is not in heaven. Okay, but putting that theological, philosophical question aside, they're patur. So why are they complaining? If you're patur, you're exempt, you're exempt. So the Chidushei Arim says the following idea, that if you love Hashem, and you're not just doing things because you have to do them, you look for opportunities to serve him. And when you don't have those opportunities, you feel pain, and you beg Hashem for an opportunity. And the lesson of Pesach Sheni is a very profound lesson. It is the gift of the second chance. No matter how impure you feel you are, we might feel we are, no matter how far we are from God, derech rechoka, if you truly want to become close to Hashem, he will give you the chance of doing it. But you have to want it enough to ask. In other words, it's one of those things where if you didn't ask, you're not going to get. But you ask and you pray and you beg. And Hashem sees how much you desire to serve him. The opportunities in life are going to become manifest. People often say, oh, I want a sign from God. I want God to show me a sign that I should do this mitzvah or that mitzvah. When God shows me a sign, then I'll move ahead. Well, once in a while that can happen, especially in Yerushalayim. But the truth is, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes God says, oh, no, don't ask me to show you a sign. I want to see a sign from you. You show me a sign that you truly want to serve me. And then I'm going to make myself available. So Pesach Sheni is the wonderful message of never giving up hope. No matter how tamei we might feel we are, impure, no matter how far we think we are, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always make himself available to us if we truly yearn to serve him. So again, even though Pesach Sheni was yesterday, I think it's an important enough message that we should remember it. And again, it's quite astounding. Had they not asked, it wouldn't have been given. This is a very unusual mitzvah. It would not have existed had they not expressed the desire for it. It would have disappeared, or at least until some other group would have asked, maybe some other year. It wouldn't have existed that year. It came, so to speak, from the bottom up, as opposed to the top down. Even though I did say Moshe was given the mitzvah at Sinai, but the mitzvah was given, if people ask, this is the mitzvah, meaning there's a certain trigger that had to be met. Okay, so that was yesterday. Let's look a few days forward to the 33rd day of the Omer. We spoke about last week, other times, and you know from your own experiences, that the period of the counting of the Omer intrinsically should be a happy period. It should be a joyous period. We're looking forward to the giving of the Torah. There is nothing intrinsic in the counting of the Omer that should have any sadness whatsoever. And the Sefer HaChinuch writes this. The Sefer HaChinuch writes that this is a happy, joyous time. And yet we know that we observe various practices of mourning, of not getting married, and music, and haircuts. And this is because of the death of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. Remember the tragedy here, that during the period between Pesach and Shavuos, the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died, and the Gaonim started the custom. It's a post-Talmudic custom that we observe mourning to commemorate the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, and Ad Hayom Hazeh. So first of all, there's part of the story that people often ignore. From Rabbi Akiva's perspective and his wife's perspective, just imagine what this meant. He went to study Torah for 24 years. His wife lived in poverty. He finally comes back with 24,000 students. All of the suffering now becomes justified. Now we understand it was all worth it. And everything that Rabbi Akiva and Rachel worked to create over 24 years, number 24 is so prominent here, all of it was destroyed. All of it went down to dust. Zero. All of the accomplishments of a life of suffering, a life of deprivation, a life of sacrifice, wiped away. In fact, Rabbi Akiva's wife died shortly afterwards. And maybe it's no accident, perhaps it was connected to heartbreak on some level. So the Talmud says Rabbi Akiva started, again, with 5 students. 5 students, among whom are Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now think about this. You build an edifice, 24,000, the largest yeshiva in the world. Mir is what, 8,000? 24,000. It's all wiped away. People have to realize Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest lessons he gave us was to start again, to not give up, to not despair. Your world is destroyed. You go on. This was the lesson of Am Yisrael in the aftermath of the Holocaust. People lost everything. They lost families. They start again. That's a tremendous lesson. That part of the story people don't pay attention to, and a person might think, what's the purpose? What? I lost 24,000 Talmidim. I'm going to teach 5 people Torah? What am I going to get out of teaching 5 people Torah? And yet, from those 5 people came the basis of the Mishnah, the Gemara, all of the Torah that exists in Am Yisrael, at least indirectly, comes from the 5 students that Rabbi Akiva taught. There was a great Rosh Yeshiva who came from Europe, Rav Shlomo Hyman. He was a Talmud of Rav Baruch Ber Lebovich, one of the Gedolei Rosh Yeshivas. And Rav Shlomo Hyman came to America before the war, before World War II, and he became the Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das. He had been a great Rosh Yeshiva in Vilna. And in those days, there were very few yeshivos in America, and even within the yeshiva, there weren't a lot of students. So he was giving a shiur, I think, to 5 students. That's the story. And he was very enthusiastic, and he was animated and movement and lebedik, very lively. So someone who knew him from Europe said, Reb Shelemah, in Europe you were giving a shir to 500 Talmidim, so you got excited, you got animated. Now you're giving a shir to 5 people. Like, what's the big deal? Why are you getting so excited like you're talking to a big crowd? And Rav Shlomo Hyman said, I'm not giving a shir to 5 people. These 5 people are going to have families, children, grandchildren. Some of them are going to become rabbis and teachers of Torah who are going to have students. I'm not speaking to 5 people. I'm speaking to the thousands and thousands of people that are eventually going to be learning Torah because of what these 5 Talmidim are absorbing. And one can imagine that Rabbi Akiva had that same vision. He had 24,000. He lost them all. He has 5. But those 5 were the future of everything that Am Yisrael became and can become. So that's the part of the Rabbi Akiva story that we often don't pay a lot of attention to. The idea of the courage and the faith in God and the faith in yourself, to be able to start again when everything has been taken away from you. And that's a very enduring lesson. So, we do have Lag BaOmer. Now, in virtually all minhagim, Lag BaOmer is either the end of the mourning period, meaning from Lag BaOmer onwards, weddings, music, or at least it's a hiatus, meaning there are different minhagim. If the Avelos continues after Lag BaOmer, or it stops after Lag BaOmer, but whether it continues or it stops, Lag BaOmer is the freebie, the free date, in which, of course, it's very, very difficult to get a wedding date on Lag BaOmer because everybody wants to get married around this time of year. Lag BaOmer is the natural date. So the question is, what is so special about the 33rd day of the Omer? So in truth, there are 2 different traditions about what makes Lag BaOmer miyuchad. Tradition number 1 is, it was the day that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. They were dying for the first 32 days of the Omer. Day 33, they stopped. Of course, it's not clear what that means. If he lost all the 24,000, it stopped because there wasn't anybody left, but apparently the Mageifa, the plague, could have kept on spreading to other people, and it just stopped. The plague stopped. This devastating plague stopped. So therefore, it's a celebration that the Mageifa stopped. That's one interpretation. And then there's another interpretation favored by the Talmidim of the Arizal, that it is connected with the death, not as part of the plague, the death later of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And why would we celebrate the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Because it is said that on the day of his death, he revealed to his Talmidim the great light, the great mystical teachings of the Torah that are contained in the book of the Zohar. And precisely when his great Neshama was leaving his guf, around that time, is when more of his light was revealed to the world. And that is the source, the tradition, that Hilula, the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's the basis of the pilgrimage to Meron, right? Meron is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried, together with his son, Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon, and it's based on the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, again, we don't have time to go over the history here. There are historical articles that question whether, in fact, this was the yard site of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Some have even said this was based on a printing mistake, because it does say in the Kitzvei Hari that Lag BaOmer is Yom Shemespo, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died. But some have shown in an earlier editions of the Pri Eitz Chaim, there was an extra letter in the word Shemet. There was a chet, Simchat, the day of the rejoicing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and the whole idea Yom Shemetbo may be a ta'ut hatfus. I'm sorry, by the way, when I give you these digressions, I'm doing it for my own self-protection, because I don't want to get letters saying, you omitted. I want the listener to know that I am aware of, again, forgive me for my self-indulgence, but I am aware of the historical controversy. But be it as it may, it is by and large Mekubal in Am Yisrael that this is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and we are celebrating the great light that he revealed, and that is why hundreds of thousands of people go to Meron. Now, of course, as all of us remember, a few years ago, or two years ago, there was a great tragedy because of the crowding. One has to be very, very careful. And this year, there's another complication. Lag BaOmer is Friday. So one has to be very, 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 very careful to time their trip so they will hopefully get back to where they have to be before Shabbos or spend Shabbos in Meron. I mean, you don't want to be in the middle of the road when it gets dark. It's not the most comfortable or Kabbalistic place to spend Shabbos. And by the way, there's even a cheshbon that even if you're willing to camp out on the roadside, but if you're going to cause extra police and security to have to work on Shabbat because of the roads, so even if they're not religious, you're contributing to extra desecration of Shabbos. So it is a cheshbon. So I'm not taking the position of whether you should go to Meron or not. In fact, some say Meron is so crowded on Lag BaOmer that even Rav Shimon Bar Yochai leaves town then. And some say it's better to go when it's not Lag BaOmer, because then you have the whole, you go to Meron, a typical day in the middle of the week, so there'll be like 20 people there or whatever it is. You can spend hours and hours by the kever of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, as opposed to when you have hundreds of thousands of people. You'll be lucky if you can even approach the kever for any significant amount of time. So that's an interesting question, whether Lag BaOmer is the day I should go, or maybe I should try to go when there are fewer people and I can have more kavana and more direction. Okay, everyone has to make their own decision about that. But the basis of going to Meron is that Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So it turns out we have two different celebrations of Lag BaOmer. One is the Magefa stopped. The other is the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That was much later. So I want to focus on each of these ideas to kind of show that Lag BaOmer embraces two different ideas that on some level are contradictory to each other. We have to work with them in tandem. First, why would Lag BaOmer be a cessation of the Magefa? Why would it be B'dafka that day? So remember what the Gemara in YIBONEH tells us. The Gemara in YIBONEH actually tells us a reason why the students of Rabbi Akiva died. They did not show proper kavod, honor, respect to each other. In fact, I mentioned last week that this is why, people ask the question, why are we mourning the deaths of 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva? Yeah, that's a great tragedy. Of course it is. But unfortunately, we've suffered worse. Crusades, pogroms, the Holocaust. I mean, why am I going over the 24,000 students year after year after year after year? And I think the answer is Pashat. If the idea is just we're mourning the loss of life or the loss of Torah greatness, then indeed, why would I focus on that instead of things that numerically were greater? But the difference is that I don't know why God brought the Holocaust. People have all sorts of theories and different suggested reasons, but I don't know what I'm supposed to work on. I'm not given an assignment because I simply don't know what the specific problems were. I mean, we guess, we speculate. With Rabbi Akiva's students, I have a definitive diagnosis. I have an authoritative explanation. Consequently, I have my assignment. What I do during the Omer period is try to rectify that particular sin. That's why I mourn over this again and again and again, because there's a specific reason I can latch onto, which is not true for the other later tragedies in Jewish history. I don't know what I'm supposed to latch onto. Meaning, the Aveilus of Sphira is not mourning, it is rectification. It is tikkun. We have to fix The loy nahagu kavod zelazeh. Now, the question is, how could it be that the students of Rabbi Akiva didn't show respect for each other? What, did they push each other out of line? Did they call each other idiots? How did they behave? I mean, after all, this is Rabbi Akiva. Remember what Rabbi Akiva taught? V'yahavta l'recha kamocha. Loving your friend as you love yourself is the most important klal in the Torah. His Talmidim didn't absorb it. So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says a very fascinating etymological point. He says, the word kavod, which we translate as respect or honor, is connected to the shirish of kaved. Kaved is heaviness, weightiness. And he says the following. If you would look at the students of Rabbi Akiva, there is no question they behaved to each other politeness, derech eretz, righteousness. But kavod is really an attitude. I look at a person, even in English, when somebody is a very, very eminent authority in a field, we might call him a heavyweight. Right? It's not just a boxer or heavyweight he's a heavyweight in medicine or whatever it would be. So kavod is the idea of looking at another person, seeing their greatness, seeing their goodness, seeing their weightiness, their gravitas, to use a Latin word. So Rav Hirsch points out, you can be polite to somebody, you can be very nice to somebody, but you might also look at them as your inferior. You're nice to them the way you'll be nice to a so-called insignificant person. But I'm nice. What do they call it? Noblesse oblige? I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. You know, I'm up here, you're down there. Now, Rav Hirsch says, when it says they didn't show proper kavod for each other, it refers to the notion that they didn't see the value in what the other represented. Now, there's still going to be a question, why didn't they realize that? But maybe, just maybe, who knows, they had such a great teacher in Rabbi Akiva that they felt, I don't really need to learn from you. What can you teach me? I'm connected to the guy above. Right? So Rav Hirsch points out that avada, the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, were not transgressing bein adam lechaveiro mitzvot, but attitudinally, they didn't have a sense of seeing the chashivos in the other person. And God took them away because you can't be a leader, because these were going to be the leaders of Torah transmission. You can't be a teacher of Torah if you don't see the weight, the significance of the people that you're teaching. The Messiah of Torah, the transmission of Torah, cannot be like sometimes communicated. Sometimes a Rebbe or a teacher might communicate the following message. I mean, not with these words, but it says, you're a nobody, you're a nothing, and I'm filled with wisdom, and I will make your life worthwhile by filling you up with all of the good stuff that I have, and you'll get rid of all of the garbage that you have. Now again, I'm not aware of any, well, maybe there are a few, but very, very few, very, very few teachers actually talk this way. But often, there may be a kind of implication. You don't really count, but I will give some meaning to your miserable life. Kavod is really the opposite idea. I see where you're coming from. I see that you have something to teach me, just as I might have something to teach you. And that, Rav Hirsch says, was the chisaron of Lanagu Kavod Zelazah. And they died. Now, if you're going to ask me, is the onesh for not showing kavod a death sentence? That sounds pretty extreme. Well, what I'm saying is it's not a death sentence per se. It's not that you're guilty of a sin, so we're going to shoot you. But rather, you can't have the role of being the transmitter of Torah when you lack that midah. So we have to go to someone else. That's how it is. Now, so what happened on Lag BaOmer that this stopped? Why did it stop? So here I have to be a tiny bit Kabbalistic. We know that the Ein Sof, the infinity of the Almighty, called the Ein Sof, relates to the world via a mechanism called the 10 spheros. These are 10 energy centers in which divine energy manifests itself in different ways. Of the 10 spheros, the first 3 are described in Kabbalah as God's intellectual processes. That's Keser, the crown, which is will, Chachma, wisdom, understanding. So we're not going to talk about the 3 mental operations of the Almighty. But the lower 7 spheros are called midos. These are already things that we connect to emotional expressiveness, in which God's mental operations are carried out into actual behaviors. And these are the lower 7 spheros, the lower 7. And I'll mention them, but I'll explain them as we go on. There's chesed, loving kindness, benevolence; gevura, inner strength; tiferes, beauty; netzach is eternity or victory; hod is glory; yesod is foundation; malchus is ultimate kingship. And these are the manifestations. Again, the idea of the 10 spheres, which is probably the single most pervasive idea in all of Kabbalah, has sometimes been attacked by great authorities as creating multiplicity within God. And that's why it's a little, you can hear both things. Some people say, if you deny the Zohar, you're an apikoros. And some people say, if you believe in the Zohar, you're an apikoros. There were movements that actually said, these are heretical ideas, because they're against the unity of God. I'm not going to get into that, although obviously the fact that I'm using the spheres obviously means I'm not going with that second position, that it's apikoros. But again, as Rav Moshe Cordovero and the Arizal tell us, there's only a single unity of God, but God is perceived in different ways by different actions. The mashal that Rav Moshe Cordovero gives is, if you pour water in colored glasses, so in the red glass, the water will look red. In the blue glass, the water will look blue. It's the same water, but it's a manifestation, it's a perception. So we have these 10 spheros, the 10 spheros, 10 different manifestations of divine energy through which God relates to the world. And I'm only looking at the lower 7. I'm not looking at the first 3, because the first 3 are really God's kaviyachol, internal mental operations. Now, what's interesting is, every week of the Omer is connected to one of these spheros. So, for example, the very first week of the Omer, which is the week of Pesach, at least the first 6 days of Pesach, so, starting from day 2, is the week of loving kindness. The next week is the week of inner strength. The third week is the week of beauty, which is the harmonization of chesed and gevura. Right? Now, so every week is identified with a sphera, but interestingly enough, because there are 7 days per week, every day is also identified with a sphera. This is kind of an infinite series, like a hologram, meaning to say, within every sphera are all the other spheres, and it keeps on going, by the way, infinity. We're not going to go past one level. But in the sphera of chesed, day 1 is chesed of chesed, day 2 is gevura of chesed, day 3 is tiferes of chesed, meaning within every dominant sphera are all the other shades at the same time. So that actually means, you can actually see this in many Siddurim, even the Art Scroll Siddur. Every day of Sphira is identified by both its week and by its day. So day 1 of Sphira is called Chesed of Chesed, second day of Pesach. Day 2 of Sphira is called Gevura within Chesed. Now don't confuse day 2 of week 1 with day 1 of week 2. Day 2 of week 1 is called Gevura within Chesed. Day 1 of week 2 is called Chesed within Gevura. And there are helpful books in English and Hebrew that try to describe exactly what my behavior should be to incorporate these different nuances, because as the divine energy flows based on that combination, I elicit it by my behaviors that correspond with that combination. So there are books that will tell you what is the chesed within Gevura, what is the teferes within chesed, all of these different things. A manual, a 49-day manual, Kabbalistically, of how I incorporate the development of my midot tovot based on the configuration of the spheres. Now, we also know, and this is true for the Ushpizin as well, the spheres are one of those things that kind of apply to everything. And that is Hakafos and the Simchas Torah, Ushpizim of Sukkah, Sviras HaOmer, other things. That there are 7 personalities who embody the essence of that spiritual energy. So Avraham Avinu represents the midah of Chesed. Yitzchak Avinu represents inner strength, Gevura. Yaakov is the synthesis and the harmonization. He represents beauty, which is also called truth. Netzach, eternity and perseverance, is Moshe Rabbeinu. Note that Moshe is number 4. Hod, glory, is Aaron. Yosef, this is why Kabbalistically Yosef is 6, not 4. It's Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron. Yosef represents foundation. And David HaMelech represents Malchus, which is said to be a repository of all of these influences, to combine them. So each week, therefore, is connected to that personality. So now, let's map out Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the Omer. Okay, I'm allowed to count it now because we're not yet there, so I'm not going to lose the bracha. So when we're going to count Lag BaOmer Thursday night, so what are we going to say? Hayom Shloshim Ushlosha Yom. This is the 33rd day. Shehem Arba Shavuot. It is 4 weeks, which is 28 days. V'chamisha Yamim BaOmer. Now it's a little confusing because you say 4 weeks, but you understand that you're in the 5th week. Even though you said 4 weeks, 4 weeks and 5 days. So Lag BaOmer is the 5th day of the 5th week of the Omer. 5th day of the 5th week. Kabbalistically, the 5th Sphira is identified as Hod, glory, Aaron. And not only is it the week of Hod, but it is the day of Hod. So Lag BaOmer is glory of glory, Hod Shebahod. Aaron squared. Aaron doubled, whichever mathematical function you want to use. Aaron's spiritual aura is the koach that comes into the world on Lag BaOmer. Now, what was Aaron HaKohen? What is the midah of Hod generally? So it says Hod, unlike Netzach. See, Netzach, which is Moshe Rabbeinu, victory. Right? Victory implies I subordinate an opposing koach. There's this opposing koach, and I win over it. That was Moshe Rabbeinu's function. Moshe Rabbeinu's function was to teach Bnei Yisrael how to conquer their Yetzer Hara, how to keep the mitzvos, right? Netzach, fight it. And he had to push it on people. People were not always willing. Moshe had to kind of force them into it. Hod is the opposite midah. Hod is when you step back and let the other person shine. Netzach is, I push you to do the right thing. Hod is, I step back so your inner goodness can emerge. Aaron's midah, Pirkei Avos tells us, is Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom, a lover of peace, a pursuer of peace. Ohev es habrios, he loved all of God's creations. That's a very broad term. That even includes animals. Umakarvan LaTorah, although probably that's not going on the animals, but he brought people to Torah through his love. The Gemara tells us that when Aaron died, the grief that Bnei Yisrael felt was even greater than when Moshe Rabbeinu died. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest of all Nevi'im. Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was God's emissary to take us out of Mitzrayim. But, to be frank, the average person didn't necessarily have a lot of connection with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was above. I mean, imagine, his very face would normally not be seen. If you'd see him walking, imagine, face covered. He's beyond us. Aaron was a man of the people, right? There was a fight between husband and wife. Aaron got involved. Aaron brought peace by making each person feel validated and accepted. Because how did he bring peace? So Avos Rabbi Nassan explains it. He would go over to the wife and say, your husband is so sorry that he hurt you, even though the husband didn't say anything. He wants to make up. And she would say, oh, it's so lovely, And he would say the same thing to the husband. Note the psychology here. He didn't tell the wife, you're wrong in what you did. He kind of validated her. And that brought her a desire to be closer. Then he validated him. Right? So Aaron's whole avodah, which is Hod, is to see the goodness in the other, to validate the other, to build a person up, and that way bring him to Hashem. So now you can understand why Lag BaOmer Kabbalistically was the day that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. Because the reason they were dying, is they didn't show proper kavod to each other. And as Rav Hirsch explains, they didn't see the specialness, the uniqueness in the other personality. But Lag BaOmer is a spiritual power based on Aaron HaKohen's Midah. And it's a double dose of Aaron. It's Hod, Shebahod. So spiritually, on that day, the cataracts are lifted from their eyes. They perceive in the other what they normally would not be able to see there. Now, if I say the Magefa stopped and didn't resume, it was a permanent change. If I say it resumed, then Nebuch, it was a temporary phenomenon. So that depends on the different minhagim. But l'chol hapachot, on that day there was that transformation. It was the Hod Shebahod, the glory of glory, that liberated them from the Lo Nagu Kavod Zelazeh. And once they're liberated from the Lo Nagu Kavod Zelazeh, they are liberated from the Magefa, which came because Lo Nahagu Kavod Zelazeh. So this would be the mystical reason why the 33rd day of the Emor had a certain koach to uplift the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, to rectify that Aveira, and in our own Avodah, we should try to be sensitive to that as well, a day of Achdus, a day of unity, a day of Avas Yisrael, and the like. So that explains theme number 1 of Lag BaOmer. But now, how much time do we have? Yeah, okay. So now we have theme number 2, a celebration of the greatness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, in Maseches Brachos, there's a very, very fascinating machlokas between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on a pasuk in Kriya Shema. Right? The Torah says, if you keep Hashem's mitzvahs, you will gather your grain. V'asafta diganecha. So says Rabbi Yishmael, what is seemingly a very sensible position. If the Torah says, if you keep the mitzvahs, you'll gather your grain, a Jew is allowed to work. I would have thought, you have to learn Torah, you can't do anything else. The Torah allows parnasa. Rabbi Yishmael says, the Torah says, it's good to make a living. That's God's reward for doing mitzvahs. Okay, that sounds right. Well, somebody argues with that. None other than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, go to work, get a job. A person is going to plow when it's time to plow, and plant when it's time to plant, and harvest when it's time to harvest, and thresh when it's time to thresh. When is he going to learn Torah? And how can he waste his life on physical survival, where every single second he is separating from God by not learning Torah? So he takes the extreme position that V'yasafta degonecha is referring to when the Jewish people are not doing the will of God. Now, Tosfos asks right off the bat, how can you possibly say you're not doing the will of God? I mean, the Torah says, V'hayayim shamoa tishmu, if you listen to Hashem. So Tosfos explains, he doesn't mean they're not doing the will of God, but he means they're not doing it at the highest level. The highest level is, Hashem will take care of me. I will devote myself to God. Now, the Gemara says, many people followed the path of Rabbi Yishmael, and they were successful. They made a living. They devoted themselves to Torah learning. They were blessed. Many people said, I'm going to be Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. And unfortunately, they starved. Which means the Gemara indicates that the general psak halacha for most people is Rabbi Yishmael. A person needs to have a parnasa, etc., a way of supporting a family. Although the Vilna Gaon is medayek, that note that the Gemara doesn't say Ein halacha ki Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. It just says many people tried it and it didn't work. The Vilna Gaon says in every generation there are going to be yechidim, who can live like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because it did work for him. Remember, for 12 years he was in a cave, fleeing from the Romans. And during those 12 years, fruit trees sprung up, water. So he basically had the attitude, it worked for me. Why can't it work for you? The Gemara says, most of the time it's not going. By the way, I want to point out again, this is something that we could talk about a lot. Is this relevant to the kollel debate? Kollel versus... So you're tempted, one is tempted to say, oh yeah, according to Rabbi Yishmael, no kollel, right? Go straight to work. No, lav dafka, because first of all, kollel is a plan. I mean, you're trying, you are creating income sources. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was much more radical than kollel. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would be the equivalent of a person saying, I'm going to learn, and I'm not even going to go to kollel because I don't want to take any money for it. I mean, it's a very radical position. It's a position where he says, I will make no hishtadlut at all in matters of olam hazeh. God will take care of me. It's much more extreme than kollel. Kollel is you're creating at least a type of short-term economic plan. His point is no plan at all. So, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I see a person of unbelievable holiness, a person whose closeness to God was so great that he was literally lifted above the world of hishtadlut, the world of economic activity. Totally devoted to Torah, to avodas Hashem. And Hashem took care of all of his needs with no involvement at all on his part. And even though that's not a midah that we can grab onto, but we admire it, like we're looking at the star and we're trying to get some of the light of that star in our own lives. So, in effect, the two themes of Lag BaOmer is a celebration of unity, tolerance, respect, Avat Yisrael, and a celebration of the transcendental greatness of a man who is totally removed from any materialism, any physicality, a person whose only desire in life is closeness to God, spiritual fire. Two different things. Now, what I want to suggest here is that in real life, these themes are almost a contradiction. Because here is the thing. It is often the case in our polarized world that the more passionate, the more fiery I am in my spiritual aspirations, the less tolerance, respect, and legitimation I can give to people who are not living in that madrega. We see it in the Torah world all the time. I devote my life to Torah study, nothing else. Oh, you work. You're an inferior type of person. You're not a person who really counts in the world. You're a person who's living a second-rate life, and there's nothing I can learn from you. Again, I'm overgeneralizing. I understand. I don't mean to attack anyone, but I'm just saying it's often going to be the case as we get truly committed to a certain ideal. We disparage those who are not living up to that ideal. And the other way around. I become tolerant. I become open. I become accepting. I'm okay, you're okay. At that point, I lose my passion for certain ideals. Because everything is the same. Everything's good. Everything's great. So, at some level, my passion dilutes my tolerance. And my tolerance dilutes my passion. Right? You can find Jews who are passionate, but disparaging of others. And you can find Jews who are open, tolerant, and respectful, who are not passionately connected to a life of Torah learning because they feel all pathways are equally legitimate. So what is the message of Lag BaOmer? The message of Lag BaOmer is a bit of a complicated message. The message of Lag BaOmer is, this is not a binary choice in life, but somehow you got to combine both. You have to connect to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, not necessarily in the way he lived his life, that may be beyond us, but in what is your priority, what is your focus, what is your goal? Avodat Hashem. But at the same time, be like Aaron, the Ohev Shalom, for Rodev Shalom, to see the good in people, to see their worthiness, not just to have compassion on them as if they're your inferiors, but to understand the goodness that lurks within the Neshama of every Jew. And if in our imperfect, distorted lives, our passion dilutes our acceptance of others, and our acceptance of others dilutes our passion, the two themes of Lag BaOmer say, you got to have both at the same time. And the truth of the matter is, this goes all the way back to the very beginning of Jewish history. This was the Midah of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu embodies in his own personality these two opposite midot. On one hand, Avraham Avinu is meforsam as the chesed, the pillar of chesed, the one who brought everybody into his home, the one who prayed even for the degenerates of Sodom and Emor. Not only praying, but arguing with God. Maybe there's 30 people, 20 people, arguing and arguing and arguing, when he didn't even argue for his own son Yitzchak. When Hashem said, slaughter your son Yitzchak, or take your son Yitzchak as a korban, he didn't say the word slaughter. So Avram said, sure, where should I go? But for Sodom and Amorah, argues, he pleads. I'm not going to address that question, but it is interesting. So Avram represents the epitome of looking at every human being as worthwhile and good. And yet, Avram Avinu is known as Avram HaIvri, Avram the Hebrew, but Chazal darshan that the word Ivri is a spiritual designation, that the whole world was on one side of the river, so to speak, and he was on the other side, meaning to say, He was passionately connected to the idea of emunah in one God. And even if the whole world thought he was crazy, he did not move from his passionate commitment. So, on one hand, he was open to everybody. And on the other hand, he was so firm in his emunah and his convictions that nobody could change him. And maybe that's why Avram is called the first Jew. The term the first Jew is a very hard to define term, actually. We don't even have a precise definition of what that means. Because obviously, Avram had a child who was not Jewish, as did Yitzchak. But one of the aspects is the ability to combine your love and your respect for the other with a firm commitment to your emunah and to your priorities and the like. And that is the challenge of Lag BaOmer, and that is the challenge of Jewish life, certainly in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz as well. So I want to wish everyone a very, very happy and joyous Lag BaOmer, and may we be zocha to incorporate these two ideas in our lives, not just on Lag BaOmer, but at all times. So thank you very much.